Religious leaders are suing New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and Mayor Bill de Blasio over reopening plans, citing a blatant double standard for religious gatherings as mass protests go unchecked. Joining us now is Christopher Ferrara from the Thomas More Society Council representing the plaintiffs. Christopher, welcome to the show. This is a fascinating case. First of all, break down for us a little bit of what the lawsuit says.
Well, we're dealing with something quite unprecedented in the history of New York State. In fact, the history of epidemiology, which is an attempt to quarantine 19 million people. And I would begin by noting that on March 26, Governor Cuomo himself said maybe that wasn't the best policy. To quote him, I don't even know that that was the best public health strategy. Young people quarantining with old people was probably not the best public health strategy. So as a threshold matter, was this whole lockdown really necessary? A serious argument can be made that it actually made things worse. And we know that in the case of nursing homes, long-term care facilities, which are incubators for the virus, the state's policy actually contributed to thousands of deaths because people who were diagnosed as COVID-19 positive were locked back into nursing homes. My own father was a victim of one of these lockdowns under Governor Murphy's similar regime in New Jersey. So what this suit is about, putting aside whether this policy makes any sense, is whether the policy is neutral and generally applicable. In other words, is the state of New York picking winners and losers, favoring some groups over other groups? If that's the case, then the law is clear. That policy has to be subjected to the most exacting scrutiny possible, and it has to be very narrowly tailored to achieve whatever interest New York State claims is compelling. In this case, they claim the interest is containing the virus, flattening the curve, whatever the rationale is. It constantly shifts. Now we're hearing that we need a vaccine before we can fully return to normal. Well, our suit says that the policy is not neutral and generally applicable, and that it does pick winners and losers. So you have a situation now where you're talking about outdoor gatherings of 10 or more, or more than 10 are forbidden under the policy. You can only have a gathering of 10 according to the policy, but meanwhile, tens of thousands of people are marching in demonstrations about the death of George Floyd, which is their right. It's a noble First Amendment cause. And we're saying that people involved in religious gatherings should have the same right outdoors. As far as we're concerned, the toleration, condonation, and even participation of state officials, including Mayor de Blasio, in these mass demonstrations, eliminates any argument for an outdoor limit on gatherings. Now, what about an indoor limit?
So Christopher, I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to bring up de Blasio because, this double standard was made pretty clear in his own behavior. De Blasio went to one of these memorial services himself at Codman Plaza that was packed. And I believe that was on June 4th. And he's out there saying, and was condemning churches, religious gatherings that were much smaller than the protests that he himself, or memorial, I should say, that he himself attended. Just take a listen to de Blasio defending protesters. I want to get your reaction.
When you see a nation, an entire nation, simultaneously grappling with an extraordinary crisis seated in 400 years of American racism, I'm sorry, that is not the same question as the understandably aggrieved store owner or the devout religious person who wants to go back to services.
So, Christopher, is it different? Is what he's saying is true? Is it true?
Well, what you've just heard is a fatal blunder, because what the mayor is really saying is that some speech is more worthy than other speech. Some speech deserves an exemption from his lockdown regime, which enforces Governor Cuomo's lockdown regime, and other speech doesn't. Yeah. And he explicitly says that religious speech, he mentions religion, is not as compelling a reason for an exemption from the lockdown as the George Floyd protests. But game over, seriously, because he's enunciating a double standard for the regulation of speech.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today, but thanks for breaking this down, and we're going to be following this case very closely. It's quite fascinating. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.